Hello and good afternoon, everyone. You're tuned in to Rappler Talk. Today we're speaking with JC Mijares. He's the grandson of Primitivo Mijares, the top propagandist of former President Ferdinand Marcos. His grandfather authored the book The Conjugal Dictatorship, which is set to be launched next week, just in time for the 31st anniversary of the EDSA People Power Revolution. So we're now gonna talk to JC. Hi, JC. Thank you
Hello.
for being here in
Thank you for
Rappler.
having me.
Okay. So let me just go straight to the point with the questions. Okay.
Okay.
So let's first start with the story of your family. I mean, your grandfather is a very prominent figure when it comes to, exposing the scandals under the martial law. Can you tell us how his story and your uncle was told to your generation, you, your cousins?
Okay, well, what I know about my grandfather is a lot, is mostly just what is said in the book. See, I know he was originally a journalist for the Baguio Midland Courier, and then a little bit later, a journalist for the Manila Chronicle. From there, he was one of the people who pushed Eugenio Lopez. For those who don't know, the Lopezes at the time were very much the kingmakers. They would be the ones who pushed presidents and turned them into presidents because of their coverage of them. And through that, he met Marcos, and through that, Marcos sort of started to trust him and then handpicked him to be absorbed into his regime. And then when that happened, he became the president of the Media Advisory Council, and he became the chairperson of the National Press Club. So I don't really hold much knowledge beyond that. So the way I learned it was mostly just from reading the book, because my parents were not too keen to just tell me about it.
But well, it has been it has been reported about the disappearance of your father and also your your grandfather and also your uncle. Was it also told to you and your cousins why is Lolo Tibo not around?
My parents were only told me when I asked. They weren't too keen to just share the information with me. So, yeah.
So you get to learn about it as you read the book.
Yeah. Again, it was mostly from reading the book that I know about his history and what was going on and why he's not around anymore.
Okay, so let's now talk about the book. The book has been printed twice, right?
Yeah,
In 76 and
1976 and
86. So can you tell us the story behind the reprinting of the book in this very timely situation?
Oh, today? Well, we're doing this because we feel that I feel that the truth should be preserved in a sense, because this book is really an insider account that is unlike any other. Because if you read, for example, in Rile's memoir, you would know that he sugarcoated his involvement with the regime. He changed the story of what happened during the bombing of the shootout at his car. So it's important that today we have a book like this that really tells the story, not just from the perspective of the people at the time who were alive, but from the perspective of somebody who was inside and was able to sort of understand Ferdinand's mind. Because one thing about my grandfather is that Ferdinand Marcos trusted him enough to allow him into his personal chambers whenever he wanted. And obviously, almost nobody got that privilege because they could kill him. So to have this book and have it be a document for what actually happened at the time is very important in preserving the history. Because another thing is that most of the people who were alive at the time, they're starting to die. Most of the people who could attest to the story and to attest to what happened, they're slowly dying out. So I feel like if we don't have something like this, we're gonna succumb to the whitewashing of the Marcoses about their history.
For the benefit lang of our our viewers who maybe don't know about your grandfather, can you just tell how about how much you know about his closeness with the Marcoses
Well,
and his duties to
he
them?
actually describes a lot of it here in the book. He mentioned, well, the first thing you should know is that he was the media czar of Marcos. In his own words, he said he was the sole conduit between the regime and the public. So what he did at the time was he made all of the propaganda that was used to further the goals of the Marcos family. So in that sense, uh, it, because of that, Marcus pretty much had to trust him to not mess up the story. So if you read the book, in the original text, we've edited this quite a bit, right? But in the original text, he would say a lot of the things he would say is about Ferdinand Marcos's thoughts, and so we edited those because there's no way that he can know how he was thinking. But you can see that they had that closeness enough that he felt like he could speak for Marcos. He felt that they were close enough.
Okay. So you mentioned about editing some parts of the book. Of course, it's reprinted and it's all already updated. So, what are the updates of the book that you think can help the today's generation on appreciating the stories there?
Okay, so one of the things we did was we added nearly 200 pages of annotations, of extra annotations in the bottom, footnotes, and the original annotations are still there, of course. But the issue with republishing a book like this is, since it came out in the 70s, there's a lot of information that he just assumes you know. Because if you were alive at the time, you would know it. So a lot of the annotations that we put in were really a way of bringing new readers into the historical context of the book and making you understand what it was like for somebody at the time.
So, of course, you read the book. What are your impressions about it? I mean, how did it affect you or it strike you as a kin of the author and as someone coming from a young generation that did not really experience the martial law?
Well, the first time I read it, it kind of went over my head. But the first time I properly read it was a couple years ago, and I remember very distinctly feeling for one of the stories in the book about Liliosa Hilao and what happened to her. And that really made a mark on me. That made me kind of angry.
Can you mention some favorite quotes
Oh,
or
actually,
favorite parts
yeah, I
of
have
the
one
book?
here. So this is in the original foreword that is now the introduction. And I read this also when I spoke at the last rally.
Mm-hmm.
It goes, the sense of urgency in finishing this work was also goaded by the thought that Marcos does not have eternal life and that the Filipino people are of unimaginable forgiving posture. I thought that if I did not perpetuate this work for posterity, Marcos might unduly benefit from a Lauralian statement that when a man dies, the virtues of his past are magnified and his faults are reduced to molehills. So that really sticks with me because it sort of embodies the whole reason we're doing it right now.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Marcos is clearly being forgiven, and I'm not going to say whether or not they're doing it actively, but his history is being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main reasons why we're republishing this book.
Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned about the story of Liliosa Hilao striking you. Are there also some other favorite parts of the book that you think you want the youth like you to also appreciate?
There's a part in the book where he talks about he has an anecdote in the book where he catches sort of Ferdinand Marcos slapping Imelda Marcos, and well, actually Imelda slapped him first, and then he retaliated, and I think that's something that should really be appreciated because the Marcoses are not just brutal in what they did, but they were just generally bad people in general.
But how about the martial law victims? Were they also about their stories? What were their stories also told in the book that could
Yeah, there
inspire
are
the
many
generation?
stories here. They talk about Fortunato Bayotmang, They talk about the Yosahilao as well. They talk about Senator Jose Diokno. Those are also good stories that you should read the book about.
Okay, so let's now talk about the so-called historical
Okay.
revisionism, because as you know, there have been polarizing debates last year because of the burial of the former president at the libingan ng mga bayani. For someone like you, your grandfather is author of a very important book. What can you say about historical revisionism and how the former president was buried at the Hero Cemetery?
Well, it's very hard to point any fingers, to be honest. So, all I can really say is that we know that he was planning it. Actually, in the book, it says he was planning it. He was planning to rewrite his history to ensure that he's remembered the way he wants to be remembered. So, as far as what I think about the burial right now, all I can say is that I disagree with it. But if you want a sort of more in-depth discussion, there's many people who you can talk to about that.
Where were you? Where were you when the burial happened? Parang were you?
I'm actually kicking myself now because I was on my way to Baguio when it happened, so I wasn't able to go and protest.
Okay, so how did you find out that it's already happening?
One of my friends messaged me and said, "Hey, they're burying him," and then I said, "What?" And he said, "Hey, they're burying him." And then he sent me a picture of all the people there and all the people there at the Libingan ng mga bayani, and a video of the rally, and so that's how I found out.
You're on your way to Baguio. You're probably having many thoughts while you're
Yeah.
in transit. So, what were your thoughts? What were your feelings?
Mostly
at the
just
time?
annoyed that it's happening. I was more annoyed that I myself was not able to be there, because that's not something I would have taken lying down.
You mentioned that you weren't able to protest at the day, but you participated in the
Yeah, I did
two
speak
big
at the
rallies.
next two rallies after the fact.
What can you say about there's a big attendance among the millennials in the two rallies
Well,
last year?
I think that's a really good sign, because one thing I wanted to talk about was that the fact that Bongbong Marcos has the gall to run for vice president, and the fact that he almost won, it's a pretty clear sign that the Marcoses are trying to get back in Malacanang, and they're almost succeeding. So I think it's very important that millennials, people of the youth, get involved in this and read books like this. But there's other books I can recommend, like Some Are Smarter Than Others by Roberto Manapat. I think it's important that not only they read stuff like this, but they get involved and they make sure that doesn't happen. Because the thing is that the Marcoses stole a lot during the time. An estimate by the CIA in 1976 put the number at $10 billion, and that's $10 billion of 1976 money. That's so much. That's a lot of money today. $10 billion today is a lot of money, much less 30 years ago. So the fact of the matter is they have unlimited money. If they wanted to, they could give every Filipino 10,000 pesos and still have a lot left over. So it's important that this doesn't become a war of resources, but rather a war of knowledge.
But you know, some people, they're also supporters of the former president of the family, that they're wishing for something like a balanced impression or a balanced interpretation of the former president in history. What can you say about it? Should millennials read books, not necessarily anti or pro, but what are the books that the young people should read so that there could be a balanced interpretation or of the former president in history?
Some I would recommend would be, this book. Another one is the one I mentioned earlier, Some Are Smarter Than Others by Roberto Manapat. Manapat. But I think the main problem there is that they're not easily accessible. Most of these books are out of print, so one of the things we wanted to do was try to get them back into print on top of just this one. Another one I might recommend is this one called Stories from the First Quarter Storm. I think that's what it's called. And it is literally just stories from the first quarter storm, just a collection of reports about what was going on. I'm fixating a bit on the word balanced, though. What do you think that means, balanced?
So maybe they want, like what they say that, for example, they want the youth to read all the resources about it and for them to decide on their own whether.
Well, I think that what they mean is that they want an equivalent amount of pro and anti, which I think is a little unfair. But reading stuff like this should give you a balanced interpretation, because it's not about slamming anyone. It's about just telling the truth.
Okay. So speaking of, now we're talking about history and balanced interpretation of what happened in the past. You studied here in the Philippines,
yes.
right? What can you say about how the martial law period was taught in schools?
Not just taught in schools, but how it's being taught in schools today, even. I think it's very lacking. I had the fortune of actually being in a school where they at least talked about it. But when I was in school, the discourse was very much that it was debatable, that it might have been good or bad for the Philippines. And I recall being on the pro side of a debate in school about whether or not it was good. So I think it's very much lacking.
Very much lacking in the way of resources, more stories to tell.
I mean, the problem is that the documentation just isn't there. There are a lot of books that talk about it, but they're kind of hard to access all the time, and they're definitely not the kind of books that can easily get into a lot of people's hands. So it's lacking in documentation, and it's lacking in attention as well, because the Department of Education is not paying attention to it enough. But luckily, an associate of mine is working on a martial law curriculum. Somebody from Ateneo Press is working on a martial law curriculum that'll actually go out to Ateneo pretty soon.
So it's exclusively for Ateneo, or is it for recommendation to the Department of Education?
It's also for recommendation to the Department of Education.
What are some points about the curriculum, like how to better tell the story of that
I'm
period?
not sure of that. Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I can't really say right now, but I would just say that ensuring that it's taught at all is a good first step.
Okay. So you're part of the generation, well, we are a part of the generation that did not experience what happened back then. So what can you say about our generation's appreciation of martial law and regaining back the democracy during the EDSA revolution? Is it highly appreciated by the youth, or?
I'm actually not sure. We had a good turnout at the last two rallies. I think somebody did a survey before of Ateneo and of LaSalle, and both schools were like 90% in agreement about martial law being a bad time in the Philippine history. Or it might have been 80%. But I don't have numbers, so it's kind of hard for me to argue for or against.
But what can you say about the outrage of people, of mostly young people, during the time that the burial happened? Does it give you hope in a sense that there's still time to save this, what they say as historical revisionism?
Yes, it does. It shows that at least people are interested to know the truth. So that's a good sign.
Do you have friends na parang they're asking you, hey, can I have a copy of the book?
Yeah, I do. I got a few people have asked me for a copy of the book. I just told them to go to the launch.
Okay, we're going to talk about the launch later. So, so now we're talking about the youth. Do you believe that it is up for this generation or the future generation to ensure that history is preserved or it's not another?
Actually, yeah. I mean, in the last rally I spoke at, where which you guys covered, but you guys left already. But I closed by saying that it is on us as the future influencers, as the future voters, as the future teachers and students and friends and families of people to make sure that this story gets told in a truthful way, in an accurate way. Because, again, like I said earlier, people are dying. People are getting old. Those people will no longer be around to tell the story, so it's on us to tell the story for them.
And what do you think can regular young people can do to make sure that, history is preserved and the truth remains be alive?
Well, it's hard to attack the problem on the offensive. It's hard to just say anything, some kind of one-size-fits-all solution to everything, because it is it is a problem that covers a lot of areas. But the first thing I would say is, if you have some kind of ties to the educational system, you should be pushing to make sure that it gets taught right. If you have friends and family who are sort of on the fence, or not really sure, you should buy them a copy of this book or of other martial law books to show them. I mean, there is a lot of other things that I can't think of right now, but essentially it boils down to educating people who can still be educated.
So, that will be all the questions. I just want you to, if you want to invite our viewers to attend the book launch that is happening next week, right?
Yeah, on the 21st.
You can have the opportunity to invite
Okay.
them.
Where do I look? Over there? Okay. The Conjugal Dictatorship of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos is having a book launch on February 21, that's next Tuesday, at 4 p.m. at the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani. So come there and you can get a copy of the book, either a paperback or we'll have some hardcover copies, and I hope to see you there.
Okay, so thank you very much,
Thank
JC,
you.
for being with us this afternoon. And thank you for tuning with us for another Rappler Talk. This has been Patty Pashon, so have a great week ahead.